What is going on, you guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be working on our LS short block round 2. I did attempt to try to put the block together before taking off to Vegas, but what had happened was the NPR rings were just too big. 42,000 on the second ring, and we're not doing a million shot nitrous or 100 pounds of boost, so it was definitely way out of spec for my liking. So when I was in Vegas, I ended up ordering rings to show up for when I come back home so we can tackle this again. And today we're going to assemble our short block. In the first attempt, we did flex hone the cylinders on camera with a flex hone 400 grit 83 millimeter. I'll show you guys the part number right now. You can't even see it, but it is GB314400. It's the 83 millimeter flex hone, and we deglazed the cylinder wall, looking mighty fine. There is some line scratches right there because we were test fitting rings yesterday, which you can see right there. Stock sleeve LS short block 81 millimeter, and we're going to be using the MAXPEEDINGROD rods, which is right here. Big shout out to Macy from MAXPEEDINGROD for definitely coming through with these right here. This wasn't on their website, but they are now, and we're going to be using this in our build along with some Nippon PR3 pistons. These are standard 81 mil spec with coated skirts, right? We're going to be running ACL race bearings for the main and the rods, but the rods are extra clearance, so we're going to be measuring a little bit different with this today. These are the piston rings that came with these pistons, but they were way out of spec as mentioned. So what I did was I ordered another set of NPR rings, but oversized. These are 81.25, and we had enough meat to file it down to specification, which we'll talk about today. I bought a brand new ring filer here. I did buy a piston ring compressor from O'Reilly's because I don't have my 81 mil piston ring compressor from ARP. Brake cleaner, oil, assembly lube. We have shop towels there, our short block here, our crank on the floor. This video, I'm not going to go full in depth like every specification on rebuilding a short block. If you guys want to see a much more thorough write-up, you can check out the ITR rebuild in the link in the description below. In this video, we're going to talk more about the aftermarket MAXPEEDINGROD with the free-floating pistons and also the extra clearance bearings. Enough blabbering, guys. Let's get down to work. So in this rebuild, we're going to be using Nippon PR3 pistons. These are standard 81 mil spec. They are domed, so you can see a little rise in the center there. It's close to the ITR compression ratio, if not a little bit higher. I could be wrong. This is going to be an all motor build, which is why we have the PR3 pistons, but also because we did have these lying around, and that is the reason why we're keeping it standard 81, just to utilize this piston set. These are cast pistons. I am going to be using the factory service manual to get the specification for the ring orientation, as well as the first ring and second ring clearances. The first thing I'm going to do right now is the piston rings. We're going to do number 4 with you guys. We are using Nippon 81.25 oversized rings. These cylinders are so worn down that the standard 81 mil was just way out of spec, so I went oversized so we can file it down. I'm going to start off with the second ring, which is the blue bag right here. You can see it says number 2 on it. Number 2 piston ring has a little taper on the edge, and it is called a scraper because it scrapes the oil off the cylinder walls. Using a flat top piston to push the ring down to the cylinder wall so it's nice and even. In this case, it wouldn't even go down evenly because of the overlapping on the rings. So if you guys can see, there's literally no gap, and it is not perfectly even in the cylinder wall because, again, it is oversized. So now let's file these down. Real Street Performance on YouTube has a very awesome video on how to file your rings. I'll be sure to link that in the description below as well too. Not too fast. You don't want to burn the rings. We are filing these rings one side only and not both ends. You have to do this a little bit at a time, and then go back to the cylinder wall, check it, and then if you need more, file it some more, go back and check it. You don't want to do 1,000 rotations because it might take off too much material. The GoPro doesn't really do too well up close, but we are starting to see a little bit light through the rings. That means the gap is starting to open up. So I'm gonna go ahead and toss this back on the filer and file it some more. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's try a 10. Let's try a 10 on here. 10 goes in. 11. Do 11. 11 goes in. Snug. Let's try a 12. So this is a tight 12. You can see the feeler gauge is kind of sitting up on its own. And our end goal for the second ring is 18. So we're gonna file a little bit more. So right now, take note, 12 goes in. I'm gonna go ahead and put this back on the ring filer and see how many revolution it takes to open up a certain amount. 1, 2, 3, 4. So you guys can see the 18,000 on the feeler gauge is standing up on its own, snugged into the piston ring gap. We did 4 revolution and that chopped down 6,000 because previously we were reading 12. So we are looking good there. So cylinder number 4, second ring gap here is done. And we already have 3, 2, and 1 over there. So now let's go ahead and do piston ring number 1. I want you guys to note this. The amount you take off on the second ring per revolution is gonna differ for the top ring because the top ring is a harder material. So this might take a little bit more and this might take actually a little bit longer. You guys can see right here, 12,000 is standing up on its own in the piston ring gap. We are setting it to 12,000s. The factory standard limit is 0.006 to 0.014. I'm putting it in the middle at 12 and the second ring is 16 to 22, which I slapped at 18. Right there, all of the rings are ready to rock and roll. If you guys are running aftermarket pistons like a forged setup, they do have their own little data sheet to tell you what to gap your rings to, or if you have your own preference, feel free to do so. Again, this short block is being built to OE specs, and I think we should be all right where we are setting these rings to. So now that we have these out of the way, I'm gonna go ahead and get these rings out and set them to the side, and then we'll flip the engine over to do the crank and the main bearings. So we have all of the main caps torqued down. The plastic gauge says we are in specification. Crank rotates freely, no bindage whatsoever. Now, if you guys are watching a Type R rebuild down below, take note that the Type R, the GSR, and some B16 have a girdle, and the torque specification for the 14 millimeters are different. If you have ARP main bolts, then you're gonna have to torque those to the specification that is provided by ARP. Now, let's assemble the pistons on the MAXPEEDING rods. So on this portion of the build, I want to give a big shout out to MAXPEEDINGROD, especially Macy, for the continued support in the last 3 or so years now. They sent over these H-beam rods. Now it's funny because these weren't even available on their website, but after requesting them, she made it happen and sent these to the house for the build. And as far as I've read online, These are pretty decent. A lot of the LS guys, muscle car guys run them, and I've seen them installed on 2Js as well, and a lot of turbo Hondas run these as well too. We are running an all motor build, not looking for high horsepower, so this is going to be perfect for the job. These come with ARP 2000 rod bolts, and they are also etched on their ARP 2000s as well as MAXPEEDING rods. Now it's important to make sure you torque these down to MAXPEEDING rods specification, because this may be their own bolts. So the cool thing about this kit is that it comes with an installation guide, and on the first 2 pages it kind of tells you ring orientations, how to position the rod bearings, so on and so forth. And then on the second page here, it has a specification for their rod bolts. These are ARP 2000s. We did verify that they are the 3/8 bolts by 1.6, and a torque specification for that is 45. We are going to be torquing this into 2 steps, so I'm going to do the first one at 22 and then 45 ending. It's like every time I record, the fire department goes off, but they're doing their job. So right now we're going to be assembling the MAXPEEDING rod with the Nippon PR3 pistons, and these are free floating, which requires an aftermarket rod. They are not pressed in like the OEM that comes out of the block. So the first thing I'm going to do right here is install the circ clip on one side of the piston for the wrist pin. The kit does provide, for some reason, Wiseco circ clips right here. I want to say this is very simple to do, although I've never done this before. This is going to take a little patience because of how springy this circ clip is. So you got to be very careful to not shoot it and lose it, because I just did that with the first one. Oh, okay, well, that wasn't too shabby. Take a wrist pin, press it down, make sure it's nice and seated, and then what I was recommended to do was on the piston itself, there's 2 little grooves on the top where you could probably put a pick through to pick the circ clip out. And then there's an opening on the circ clip. So the opening on the circ clip, you want it to be opposite end of the 2 holes or a single hole, depending on the piston. So the holes here are on the top, and then the opening of the circ clip is on the bottom, right? The arrow on the piston right here faces the crank. Also, the bigger relief on the piston itself is the intake side. So when you hold it in your hand, you'll know that the arrow goes to the crank. Big relief is towards the intake manifold, and then the smaller side goes to the exhaust side. And then for the rod itself, tangs are these little square right here inside the rod journal. These tangs right here faces the exhaust side as well. So when you assemble the rods and the pistons, make sure the orientation is correct, and go ahead and dabble the wrist pin with some oil, as well as the inside of the pistons itself, and also inside the rod. Tang is facing me, exhaust side. Small relief facing me, exhaust side. Arrow facing the crank, just like so. Now we take the wrist pin, install it on the open side without the circ clip. Take the second circ clip, take another wrist pin, seat the circ clip. I just heard it click in. Move it around, lubricate it, and there you have it. MAXPEEDING rod, Nippon PR3 pistons. Let's do the rest. The weather is drizzling right now, but guys, we have the MAXPEEDING rod and the Nippon PR3 pistons all assembled. The next thing I'm going to do here is assemble all of the piston rings. I am going to mark them 1, 2, 3, 4. You don't want to mix them all up because these rings are gapped according to each cylinder. So we're going to go ahead and just do that now. I got to find my oil control ring somewhere. There they are. This is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4. The first set of piston rings I'm going to install is the oil control ring. I'm not going to use the one from the 81.25 box because obviously they are bigger, and normally these don't need to be filed down. So I'm going to go ahead and just grab the original 81 mil, brand new and sealed. This is cylinder 1, so I'm gonna have to grab the ring set that I measured for cylinder number 1. So I'm gonna go ahead and grab cylinder number 1, second ring. Now we did file these down, so that means we have to clean up the burr on the end of the side that we cut. I don't have one of the little filers for deburring these edges, but I do have 600 grit, and I'm gonna lightly sand the edges to get it nice and smooth so it doesn't gouge the cylinder walls. Make sure there's no edges on here that you can catch with your skin. These are Nippon piston rings. They have an N on the top which faces up. Some piston rings have a dot on it. Second ring also have a little taper lip which scrapes oil off the cylinder walls. So I'm gonna go ahead and just install this now. If you don't have a piston ring spreader, be very gentle, be very careful, and install these rings onto the piston. Like so. I'm gonna go ahead and grab first ring, top ring, deburr it a little bit. Top ring has an N that faces up as well. Go ahead and get that on here. All right, top ring, second ring, oil control rings installed. Let's go ahead and do the rest. Again, guys, I'm not going very thorough with this installation because I want to cover more on the things we're doing differently opposed to the ICR rebuild, which is the free-floating pistons, the MAXPEEDING rods, and the extra clearance bearings. So right now I just clocked all of my piston rings according to the FSM. I'll throw that on the screen here. I'm not going to show you guys that. Simple enough. If you guys want to see a much more detailed ring orientation, be sure to check out the link in the description below for the ITR rebuild. Before we get the pistons into the cylinder, we are going to install the rod bearings. I'm going to do this one at a time just so we don't get these rod caps and hardware mixed up. We are using ACR Race standard extra clearance. This one has the HX at the end of the part number. I'm gonna drop the piston in cylinder 1 and 4. I'm gonna go ahead and lubricate cylinder 1 right now. Got this piston ring compressor from O'Reilly's. I'm gonna go ahead and just lubricate this as well too. Right here it says rod number 1. I'm gonna check my ring orientation again before I compress it. Just checking it one more time. So we have a little bit of the piston skirt sticking out of the compressor, so that way we can align it into the cylinder. Make sure your intake valve relief is on the correct side. The arrow is facing the crank. Tangs are facing the exhaust. I'm gonna go ahead and drop this as straight as possible into the cylinder. Get the skirts all up in there. Go ahead and make sure the compressor is nice and flat out. And if you tighten this enough, it should just slip into the cylinder. Like that. I'm gonna go ahead and bring rod number 1 and 4 all the way up. These are extra clearance bearings, so I am going to plastic gauge them and shoot for a 0.015 to 0.020, so 15 to 20 thou. And hopefully I have enough here. You guys are probably chopping me up in the comment section about saying thou. Rod caps have the bearings inside of it. The tangs are the exhaust side. It is also on the matching side to the rod. So make sure this is nice and dry. This is one. I am going to use ARP assembly lube on the rod bolts. Same thing for number 4. I'm going to torque this down to 22 first. I do have the crank lock so it doesn't move, but I'm also going to torque it this way so I don't turn the rotating assembly. So according to the MAXPEEDING rod pamphlet, 3/8 by 1.6 ARP 2000s, we are torquing it down to 45 foot-pounds. There is a recommended rod stretch specification, but we don't have a rod stretcher, so we're just going based off torque specs here, because, you know, typical garage guy tools, you know. So we're going to go up to 40, 43, 44, 45. I'm gonna go ahead and remove these rod bolts, remove the cap, and then check what the plastic gauge says. Okay, so cylinder number 1, we are a little bit under the 15. That white section right here for the 15, you can't even see it on the GoPro. But it is a little bit under, so I'm gonna guesstimate somewhere 16, 17 maybe, because it is a little bit wider than the 20. So we're kind of in between what we're looking for. On number 4, it is a little bit smeared, but it is a little bit bigger than a 20, but smaller than a 15. So I want to say, again, maybe 16 or 17. I think we're looking pretty good. So I'm gonna go ahead and just clean these off. I'm gonna take some pictures right now, send it for some feedback, but I'm gonna clean these off and throw some lubrication and torque these suckers down. Cylinder number 2 is a little under the 15, maybe 16 or 17. Cylinder number 3, under the 15, a little bit bigger than a 2.0, so maybe again 16, 17. So it looks like they're consistent between 1, 2, 3, and 4. Which is good. Now let's button this up. So that is going to wrap it up for today's video, guys. The LS short block rotating assembly is all said and done. I want to give a big shout out to MAXPEEDING Rod for providing us with the LS H-beam rods. Right there, MAXPEEDING rod. If you guys are interested in the same rods or for the GSR, I believe B16, you can check the link in the description below and use discount code YSTATIC to save a little bit of funds before purchasing. We made it the MAXPEEDING rod with Nippon PR3 pistons, and we also used the NPR rings with that. ACL main bearings, ACL standard bearings with extra clearance, and we also have the ACL thrust washers. All of this is in the short block right here, and the cylinder head is going to be a GSR with full valve trains and block HSL cams. We'll talk more about it once I pull it off my built turbo B series engine on the floor over there. But as far as the rotating assembly goes, this is all we're going to do. I don't have an oil pump. I don't have all the water pump, timing belt, the oil pan, the gasket. I don't have any of that. Well, actually I do, but I don't have all the brand new stuff to assemble this whole entire bottom end. But at least the rotating assembly is done. Again, I didn't really cover the full thorough of the installation, only the items that we did differently opposed to the ICR engine, which is the extra clearance bearings, the free floating piston, the MAXPEEDING H-beam rods, and yeah, hopefully I covered everything, and hopefully it wasn't too confusing. This is a learning curve for me. I am not a professional by all means, just a typical garage guy, just doing what we can with what we have, and this is the result of that. Making move in the right direction with the all motor build. The chassis I am going with, some of you guys already got it, some of you guys don't, but I think it's going to be a pretty cool build here on the channel. So I am going to wrap up the video right here. If you guys enjoyed the bottom end rotating assembly installation of the MAXPEEDING rod and PR3 Nippon pistons, be sure to hit the like button, and if you guys want to stick around for the rest of this build soon to come, be sure to hit the subscribe button. With that being said, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.